Hello. Today we are going to look at the startup procedure for the BAE 146 in Microsoft Flight Simulator. We're going to take it from cold and dark on the ground, everything switched off, to an operating aircraft that we can go and taxi out to the runways. Okay, so if we go and jump inside the aircraft, I'm actually going to use a checklist to do this. I'm not going to do this completely, making it up as I go along. So you'll forgive me if I pause now and again to look things up. So first thing we need to do in the BAE 146, if we just have a look around the cabin, you can see nothing switched on. This is as the aircraft launches into the simulator. First thing we need to do is go and look overhead. So if we go and look around overhead, there are several panels, so we're going to get acquainted with them. There's this panel immediately over the pilot and the co-pilot, and then there's a rear section to that. And there are control keys along the keyboard. If I press Control and 7, that lines up the panel that's directly over the pilot and co-pilot. If I press Control and 8, we go to the rear section of that panel. So we are going to start off the lower section. And the first thing we need to do is turn the batteries on. So you can see the batteries are in the electrical panel here. So we turn on the batteries 1 and 2. And you can see that voltage becomes available, and you can read off those voltages that are available by moving the meters here. Obviously there's nothing coming out of the APU yet. Okay, so after doing the batteries, we go further back at the top and we turn on some lights and notices. So we want the nav lights to be switched on. And the reason we're doing that is as soon as we're in the aircraft, we want people to know that the aircraft is in the process of being started. So we've turned the nav lights to high. Okay. Next is no smoking to auto. So here's the no smoking switch. You can see it goes 3 ways. We want it on the middle setting, which is auto. Cabin emergency to armed. So next to it is cabin emergency, and armed, as you can see here, is the middle setting of the rocker. On the far left, we want to set the yaw dampers to 1 and 2 to on, and all 3 of these switches here, so the autopilot master switch, avionics A and avionics B, to on. So that's giving power to the systems throughout the cockpit basically, and the autopilot for later. Okay, so on the far left, on the inset panel here, we've got the anti-skid and lift spoilers. So anti-skid needs to go to on, and the lift spoilers need to go to on as well. So this is the power for lift spoilers. Are used on the ground to stop the aircraft from lifting off basically. I can't describe it any more simply than that. And that's giving power to those actuators that lift the lift spoilers. Okay. Control 7. So we're going to just go down to the further, or the lower part of the front of the cockpit. On the second column we've got electric, and we're going to set the bus tie AC and DC to auto. So if we look down here, they are both here. So this is switching the buses. We're basically cross-feeding the electric to different parts of the aircraft. Standby inv and standby gen to arm. So these are both the switches here. APU gen to on. Okay, so if we look down here, we've got the APU gen is this bottom switch. So this is turning on the generator that will generate electricity from the APU when it's running. We need then to turn on the fuel pumps left inner to on. So what we're actually doing here is getting ready to run the auxiliary power unit. And the auxiliary power unit is a small jet engine in the back of the plane. And that is used to generate electricity and to generate air pressure to spin up the jet engines. So what we're doing here, we're getting the generator ready that will generate electricity when the APU is running, and we're providing fuel to the APU, and you use the left inner fuel pump to provide fuel to the APU. Okay, so then we can go to the master switch for the APU and click on start, and you will see the RPM slowly climbs. If we go and look outside and come into the back of the aircraft, the APU, you can see there's heat haze already forming, and you can hear the whine. So if we go back inside, you can see that slowly coming up, and when it gets into the green area, a light will illuminate saying that the APU is available. There we go. So the APU is automatically cross-fed over now, and it's providing electricity for the aircraft, not the batteries, but we leave the batteries on. Down on the lower panel, we are going to arm the emergency lights. So down here, we switch to the middle of the rocker switch is to arm. So we're arming the emergency lights throughout the aircraft. Okay, so then we go to the panel at the back of the center pedestal. So if we have a look around from here, you'll see where this is. So in between the pilot seats, there's this center pedestal, and down here, I've lost where I am now. Oh yes, we're turning on the yaw dampers. So we click on the black square there, and it illuminates there are 2 yaw dampers. Yaw dampers are used on an aircraft to stop yaw when it's going in and out of rolls. So you'll notice it on some aircraft, as you either pitch into a turn or come out of a turn, the aircraft will yaw dramatically. It's called induced yaw from the ailerons. It's actually the drag on each side of the aircraft from the ailerons that causes it to happen. And the yaw dampers, it actually kicks in some opposite rudder to stop that yaw from happening. Okay, and then on the left and right side panels of the cockpit now, either side, you will see there is an oxygen system. So we're going to go and switch that on the pilot side and on the co-pilot side. So that's that done. Then back overhead, we're going to go back over to the panel above the pilot and the co-pilot. In the first column we've got fuel, so it's over here. We're going to set on the center tank transfer to auto. Okay, center tank transfer is here. So what this is the pump in the aircraft that is going to move the fuel from the center fuel tank out to the wing fuel tanks. So any aircraft that has, well, let's have a look outside to explain this. Most of the fuel in most aircraft is in the wings, but there's also a center fuel tank on many aircraft. So what this means is the center fuel tank will deplete first and push its fuel into the wings, which then gets used by the engines. So that's allowing that to happen. Ice protection. Ice detect to on. So ice protection is down here and over here. Yeah? So we want to set ice, engine anti-ice to on. I'm just going to check that. Oh, it's the one under the cover, sorry, over here. So this is, yeah, ice protection. These are the heaters for the ice protection. This is the actual ice detection. So it's the detection. I've need to write that down a bit better. Ice detector on. So bear with me a second. That's on the 4th column. Okay, back on the main panel, if we press Control 3, we get to see the co-pilot's display. So there's a bit of a shortcut here. In terms of the real aircraft, these markers on the airspeed indicators can be moved, and they represent the rotate speeds and the mins and maxes. You can actually shortcut that. In the real aircraft, they would look through this flip book for the load of the aircraft, and that would give them the numbers to put in for this. We can just click on it and they all move for us. We can then go and turn the flight directors to on. So we go, the flight directors are the switches here and here, and they are the needles that appear on the artificial horizon that indicate what the autopilot wants us to do to follow the path. So we can press that for both sides and you will see the needles appear on the artificial horizons, or attitude indicators as they're supposed to be called. Next is the Nav Radio. So we're going to turn on the Nav Radio. You switch it on here by clicking the middle of the knobs, and then you turn this to on alongside it. On the front pedestal, if we press Control 5, we can turn on the comm radios. So there's comm radio for the pilot and for the co-pilot. Okay, at this point in the flight plan, or sorry, in the setup procedure, you would go and set up your flight management computer, which is right here. So you put your route in, and you would set up the nav radios, we're giving them frequencies, and you would go through the MCP, the master control panel for the autopilot, you know, potentially giving it a heading and an initial altitude to climb out to, and all the rest of it. And you might arm that altitude. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward stuff. I'm not going to cover that in this video because that's flying the aircraft. That's not getting it up and running. Okay, next we go to, once the pilots have finished, you know, putting the flight plan in and reading through all their notes, this is what you typically see them doing while the passengers are boarding. You're going to go and turn on the seatbelt sign because we're going to start getting the airplane ready to fly. So seatbelt sign goes on and you hear that familiar sound when after you've sat in your seats and the stewardesses have gone round. And next we go further back overhead and we turn the beacon light to on. This is generally accepted when you turn the beacon light on. You are about to start the engines. And at this point as well, if you are going to get the tug to push you out to do the pushback, at this point this is when this would happen. Because then the pushback would happen, and then the pushback communication would tell you during pushback you're okay to start engines because you're away from the gate, for example. Okay, so we're going to start the engines. What do we do then? We go to the fuel pumps on the far left of the overhead panel and we turn them all on. Yep, so these are rocker switches. We turn all of the fuel pumps on. And now we are ready to start the engines. So the APU is providing air to spin the engines up, and the fuel pumps are providing fuel to fuel the engines. So we set the master start switch to on for the engines. We select the engine we want to start first, and we always start with number 4, and we hit the engine start button. So if we go and look down in the cockpit, you will see the numbers changing here on the dials. There's the N1, which is the gas turbine, and if we look, it's gone past 10 already, so that's not a big problem. On the throttles there are switches. These switches are the main fuel valves for the engines. So if we flick one, the lever moves forwards from complete cutoff to on, and having done that, you will see this is now accelerating onwards. So that's a percentage of nominal, by the way, of the gas turbine engine, and you've got the exhaust gas temperature there as well. So we'll wait for those numbers to come up. Oh, it's not percentage, sorry, it's the temperature of the engine. Okay. Yeah, the percentages are the top numbers in yellow, but they won't make much sense yet. Okay, so then we go and look. Control 7 again. You will see those lights that came up saying the start sequence was happening have now gone out. So we can go to engine number 3 and hit start again. So it's basically a case of starting each engine and then waiting for the lights to go out. But you have to remember to come back down here, and after the engine has gone past 10, which that one has, you can go and flick the switch on the fuel. And you can actually do these out of turn. It doesn't matter. Or sorry, the simulator doesn't complain about you doing it. So if we go back overhead, wait for the lights to go out, which means that the engine is up to speed. And then we'll go for engine number 2 as well. So what's happening here is the APU is providing air pressure to spin the engine up using compressed air, and then the fuel is introduced on the fuel pump and it's ignited, and then the engine takes over. So we just wait for that to happen. It's happened now. So we can go to 2 now and start. Oops. Need to start number 2. Notice that didn't cause any problem. The start master switch is the starter. Once an engine is running, switching the starter off isn't going to harm anything. We'll actually see that in a moment. Once we get all 4 engines running, we will actually go and turn off the starter on purpose. We're just waiting for engine number 2 to come up. Remember, we've already set the switch on the throttle. There we go, engine 2 is up and running and idle, and then we can start engine number 1. If we go and sit outside, we can see it's getting noisier. Those engines are spinning. We sit behind them. Actually, this aircraft has got such small engines, they don't cause a huge heat haze, which is quite cool. So just waiting for number 1 to come up. Now it is important, once you've got all 4 engines running, that you move the engine starter back to the off position, or the engine selector I should say. There we go, so this goes back to the off position, and then we can turn the start master switch off, because we have started the engines now, they're happily running. On the second column over here, on the engine generators, we can now turn on engine generator 1 and engine generator 4. So rather than using the APU to generate electricity, we're going to cross feed over and use the engines instead. So there goes 1 and there goes 4. So now the engines are providing the electricity for the aircraft. We can now turn on the packs. Now these are the air conditioning packs that provide the hot air to the aircraft. There are longer versions of this startup where we could have put those on earlier to warm the cabin up before we did the engine start. So while the aircraft sat at the gate, for example, you could warm it up for the passengers. So we are going to turn on the packs now. Now the reason we don't do that before the engine start and leave it switched on is the packs use compressed air. If you use the compressed air for the packs, you then don't have enough air pressure to start the engines, to spin them up. So that's an important thing to think about. In terms of sequencing, you can't start the engines with the packs on. Okay, so packs are on. We go back overhead. We're going to put the brake fans to auto. We're going to go to the hydraulics and we're going to turn on the hydraulic pumps. So we've got hydraulic pump number 2 and hydraulic pump number 1. And then back overhead, ice protection, we're going to turn on all of the heaters. And at that point, we are ready to taxi. If we look down in the aircraft and go and, oops, if I can actually get the view to move, and look over on the panel down here on the warning displays, these are to do with the brakes being on. If I release the parking brake, we're all good. It's just the brake fans. It's got a green notification just to tell us that it's on. Okay, so at that point we're ready to fly. Obviously we can, if I sit here with the parking brake on, we can verify that by moving the throttles forwards. Obviously it's not going to like us pushing the throttles forwards while we've got the parking brake on, is it? But there you go, the 146 is ready to fly at that point. So I will make the PDF detailing all of these steps available as a link to download from the Virtual Flight Online forum, and you will be able to get to that from the notes on the video. Okay, so hopefully that's useful to you. I'll do another video at another point going through the FMC. There's a bit of a story here. This is not the accurate flight management computer for the 146. This is the stock Boeing one, or sorry, the stock CJ4 one, I believe, from Flight Simulator that the developers of the 146 have inserted into it, and they were quite, straightforward. Sorry, not Asobo. It's the working title FMC from the CJ4 that they've included in it, and they've restricted quite a lot of the functionality from it, so it's a kind of a subset of the functionality. What you can do, the earlier models of the 146 didn't have a flight management computer, so you can remove it. If you come into the aircraft section in the tablet, you can click on the cog and you can remove the FMS system. So if we do that and look over here, it's gone. And this is now much more accurate to the 146s that flew in the mid 80s to mid to late 80s that didn't have the FMC, so you're restricted then to VOR navigation, which is far more accurate to the real thing. Otherwise, yes, that's it. That's the BAE 146 in Flight Simulator. Oh, if you want to know about removing the chocks, that's on the tablet as well. So the last thing you might do before you start rolling is get someone on the ground to remove chocks. So you just click the marker there on the tablet for chocks, and you're good to go. So notice if we remove the parking brake, there's a small amount of positive thrust. Look, the plane is rolling. Can you see that? So something to be aware of when you're sat on the ground. You need to have the parking brake on. Okay, we're done. The BAE 146 startup procedure. Hopefully you like that. Like the channel, click the like button, click subscribe, and I'll see you again soon.